Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is well this evening. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. We have an exciting speaker tonight to talk about an important history of Canadian foreign policy that is overlooked. So I will try to get right to the sort of some summary of the week's developments in Canadian foreign policy. Today's Globe and Mail has a big story about the UN report saying that the M23 rebels that are backed, armed, coordinated by Rwanda that have invaded Congo, that have displaced about 800,000 people over the past year, and have been involved in all kinds of violence over the past decade as part of a 30-year Rwandan horror show in Congo, that they are recruiting child soldiers. And the Canadian government, through the Dallaire Institute, Romeo Dallaire, has been backing, this initiative with Rwanda around ending child soldiers. And now this UN is showing that basically the Rwandan forces are recruiting child soldiers. It's quite an embarrassment. Millions of dollars have gone to Rwanda. And when this was signed back in 2017, I believe it was called, I think, the Vancouver Principle Conference in Vancouver, Trudeau government really whipped up this business about them being humanitarian. Kagame, Rwanda's leader, was right at the center of it, and it was always clear that this was going to be a dubious affair because anybody who'd been paying attention in Congo knew that Rwandans have repeatedly used child soldiers, but now the UN reporting on it is pretty embarrassing for the government. Another initiative, another topic that I wanted to mention last week that I didn't really get into, but I think is important, is this change that's developing, that's announced, and it's going to be taking place, I think, in coming days, weeks, around legislation after about 18 months in Afghanistan, the aid groups in Afghanistan saying they can't operate in the country because the Taliban is designated a terrorist organization in Canada. And so you can't even like buy oil, buy gas for your vehicles if in one way or another the gas station is associated with the Taliban, which because they run the country, they often are. So all these aid organizations are feeling they were basically worried they could get prosecuted for providing any assistance in Afghanistan. Those have been campaigning on this for a long time, over a year. Finally, the Liberal government announced they're going to change this. Legislation that's going to provide some carve-out, a 5-year carve-out for specific countries where you can operate. You can go ask for this carve-out. Now, obviously, this is a step in the right direction. I think that, whatever you want to say about the Taliban government, certainly the idea of stopping aid into Afghanistan because it's a Taliban government is an anti-humanitarian kind of position. But this question goes at the whole question of Canada's terrorism list, which in my opinion is a completely odious affair. It's used for political and geopolitical reasons, and it really should just basically, disappear. Hasn't been around actually for that long. And if you look at it, like most of the Palestinian political organizations are labeled terrorist organizations, but the Israeli military is not a terrorist organization. But all these Palestinian groups that even at the most extreme claims against them aren't responsible for nearly as many deaths as the Israeli military. So the whole terrorism list is something that should really be questioned and reevaluated. And this carve out for Afghanistan or for other humanitarian potential other humanitarian situations is a step forward, but the fact it took 18 months speaks to how committed the government is to this terrorism list that is really an odious geopolitical tool. The New York Times, a few days ago, the New York Times had a story titled "A Mossad's Agent's Treasure Trove of Photos." So it was about a Mossad agent back in the 70s. Sylvia Raphael is her name. And in the story, it says, quote, at a later meeting, Mr. Amit told the prime minister that the woman was a Mossad agent using a Canadian passport who was working as a photographer for a French press agency. So the story just sort of in passing mentions Canadian passport for this Mossad agent who was involved in an assassination effort, and there's actually a whole history of this, kind of an interesting history. We don't know all of the details because it's obviously a murky world of intelligence, but there's a whole bunch of stories about how Mossad agents historically have used Canadian passports to assassinate Palestinians and others internationally. And it became one instance in 1973 in Norway where they actually there was a mistaken assassination. They killed a Moroccan waiter thinking it was some Palestinian that they wanted to kill, and they used a Canadian passport. And there's this, I detail some of this in my Canada and Israel Building Apartheid book, but there's this whole history of using of Canadian passports. And when it became a big deal was in 1997 when the then Netanyahu government responded to a 30-year truce offer by Hamas by trying to kill Khalid Mashal, who was then the chairman of Hamas's political bureau in Jordan. And they put a poison in his ear, but the agents that did it were captured. And they were captured on using Canadian passport to get into Jordan. And it became quite a scandal, and the Canadian government was forced to act like they were going to reprimand Israel. They didn't really, but they sort of went through the motions. That was the Chrétien government, Lloyd Axworthy as a foreign minister, and so anyways, so this is whole history. This is just one Canadian contribution, and there's a history that suggests that the Canadian CSIS and Canadian intelligence agencies have been aware of this and basically turn a blind eye. And they do so because they exchange the Israel using Canadian passports for intelligence on historically on Arab Canadians, people potentially immigrating to Canada. And so they basically turn a blind eye to the use of Canadian passports. And this goes to the more broad connections between the Canadian intelligence services and their Israeli counterparts. And those are much more extensive than is sort of widely understood. And there's a whole history of that I also document in my Canada and Israel Building Apartheid book. On the positive front, with regards to Palestine, as I mentioned in previous sessions, Sarah Jama, who was running for the NDP in the Hamilton Centre, Ontario by-election for the Ontario legislature, she won her seat, like massively. I think she won every single riding or every single voting center. And this was a blow to the Israel lobby that had been this whole campaign attacking her for standing up for Palestinian rights. And the Toronto Star and other media, the left end, the Toronto Star, but obviously the right-wing media as well, have been attacking her quite a bit, and it continued even after her election. But the NDP, including Jagmeet Singh, Andrew Horwath, the mayor of Hamilton, and the now leader of the Ontario NDP, have come to her defense. And so it seems to me that the partisan, kind of NDP partisan dynamics are superseding their fear of the Israel lobby's anti-Semitism attacks against her, which I think is a step forward. This is a positive development on the question of Palestinian rights in this country, and dealing with these odious smear campaigns that helped destroy Jeremy Corbyn in Britain and have been used in the US and many other places. Yesterday here in Montreal, there was a rally in solidarity with the Chinese community, or against the recent efforts by the Montreal police, the RCMP, to investigate two different Chinese cultural organizations in the city. And then the media picked up on it. They leaked this to the media. And the Chinese Family Service of Greater Montreal and Sino-Quebec organizations they announced they're being investigated, which is the police aren't supposed to announce their investigations. This is fitting into this whole like anti-China political interference, linking it to these supposed Chinese police stations. So there was a protest challenging. That was about 40 people that attended, which is not huge, but considering the climate, and it was a quite last minute rally, it was a good little mobilization. On the question of this political interference and these police stations, this whole claims of Chinese police stations across Canada, I don't know much about it. It all seems quite vague and unclear. But what we do know is that there is the NYPD has police stations in Canada, has about more than a dozen police stations around the world. And that's not viewed as some like big dangerous thing. But when it's the Chinese who, and again, it's all in kind of murky what they're actually claiming. This is coming from Western funded organizations making these claims. But it's being used to target these Montreal-based, long-standing, decades-long community organizations in this sort of attacks against them. And this week we saw the continuation of this whole Chinese interference kind of storyline. The front page of Thursday's Globe and Mail was strongly implying that the Chinese consulate in Vancouver had basically helped get this first ever Chinese Canadian mayor of Vancouver elected. And it's all very thin about what's actually what the actual claims are. It's basically Kennedy Stewart, who was the then mayor, former NDP MP, saying that after he came out critical of basically opposing the Canadian government's position of one China, saying that Taiwan was independent, which goes against the Canadian US government's positions even, that the Chinese consulate started working against him, and Chinese business people in Vancouver wouldn't fund his campaign, and they wouldn't invite him to speak at as many events, and this and that. That's the sort of like gist of what the accusations are. But this is continuing of this whole Chinese interference. The Chinese are shaping all our politics. That's all again part of this much bigger US-led campaign to try to contain China's rise. The video I showed last week of asking Pascal Saint-Onge, the sports minister, about what standards are used to define when athletes are excluded from, what countries athletes are excluded from international competitions. That video just went completely wild on Twitter and online. My tweet of it has 1.4 million views. That's my tweet alone. A number of other Twitter from different organizations, different media organizations have hundreds of thousands more. One thing that someone sent me on Facebook, in an Arabic version of it, had 1.1 million views. It was Jimmy Dore, the US comedian, did a whole clip of it. When they sent it to me like 10 hours after, it had 70,000 views. Reported on by Chinese media, Russian media, Venezuelan media, Indian media. Al Jazeera had me on to discuss it in part. So it was just incredible how far and wide it went. And really, I think it's because it's just there's some good dramatic elements of the video itself, and her smirking and running away is all kind of funny. But it's a simple question, right? It's a simple question that nobody in the corporate media bothers asking the sports minister. What are the standards? What do you think about American athletes being banned because of the US invasion of Iraq, Canadian athletes because of Libya, Israeli athletes, etc. And so I think it's a really simple question and probably on a lot of people's minds, and that's why it's got the circulation. Now, I have to say, not a single Canadian media has touched it. Nobody from CBC got in touch wanting to have, talk about it, debate it, whatever. Just complete silence. And I think it's not just because, and also I should say that the sort of like right-wing voices who do often, comment on my stuff on Twitter, they have almost entirely gone silent as well. And I think it's partly because it's not really just an attack against the minister. It's not really just an embarrassment of the minister, but it's an embarrassment of the whole media sphere in this country, that it took me a year after, some like random activist who doesn't have access to the minister going and, waiting through a 20-minute presentation at a technology about hothouse tomatoes to finally be able to ask the question of the minister. So I think that's part of why they didn't even attack it, is because it's actually such an embarrassment to their whole sort of media profession. On a different note, I did a couple of events in Hamilton and Western. The Hamilton event last week on Wednesday, there seemed to be some pressure in the background, but in Western at London, at King's College of Western in London, Ontario, there was a full throttle effort to shut the event down. That was pretty remarkable. So it was an event about Canada-Palestine, and a group called the Western Ukrainian Students Association put out a statement what they titled Western Ukrainian Students Association Statement on the King's University College Eve Engler event. In that statement, it called me a, quote, apologist to a bloodthirsty regime who spreads disinformation and uses Russian propaganda talking points. It says that I, quote, endanger victims of colonialism everywhere, said that the event might, quote, incite violence. And then it's concluded by saying, we cannot allow a proponent of hateful disinformation and Russian propaganda in our campuses in any capacity. Presumably, I'm not allowed to go to the library at Western University because any capacity, this is some danger to the campus. And the day after this came out, the couple of the anti-Palestinian Jewish organizations on campus also put out a statement saying that I should be banned from the campus. The Ukrainian Canadian Congress put out a statement on the 14th, basically condemning anti-Ukrainian hate and calling for the government to take action. And so basically the Ukrainian, right-wing Ukrainian groups have really adopted the Zionist kind of playbook of trying to suppress events that go against some of their outlook on the grounds that it's going to engender hate against Ukrainian students on campus. It's quite a shocking tactical move. But it speaks to just the climate of any dissent, any questioning of the official line on the NATO proxy war is just considered outside of bounds. And I think that it should really, I would love to have if there were some student groups across the country that organized a tour of campuses in the fall of, put it right in their face. Let's push back against these McCarthyite tactics and have and really do a tour of campuses on this question. In Washington D.C. on the 18th, on Saturday, there was a anti-war demo from left-wing organizations that organized a big anti-NATO opposition to U.S. contribution to the proxy war. It's not clear to me exactly how many. It seemed like thousands of people. It seemed not amazing in terms of its turnout, but a fairly solid mobilization. So that's good. Unlike, a month ago when there was that rage against the war machine that had left and far right or right-wing forces backing it, all these these self-identified sort of like anti-fascist kind of basically liberal types just spent days and days attacking this demonstration that was brought right-wing and left-wing forces together. Many or most of those people just went quiet. They didn't even mention the demonstration, confirming that their issue wasn't just that it was right and left-wing forces, but in fact that they disagree with those criticizing the NATO proxy war. So that was kind of interesting to see that on Twitter of how that dynamic plays out with those just complete silence about this, important mobilization from these, self-described anti-fascists who spend most of their time attacking left-wing forces that are challenging U.S. and Canadian imperialism. On the note of the proxy war, Anita Anand announced a number of more weapons to the Ukrainian military. There was also the Americans, the Wall Street Journal on Saturday had a story titled, quote, "Washington tries to halt Beijing push for Ukrainian truce." So US officials are on the media opposing this bid for a truce in fighting or negotiation. So now this has been clear now for more than a year. Before the Russian invasion, the Americans were obviously trying to sabotage any negotiations around Ukraine not joining NATO to avoid the invasion and all that stuff. But they continue openly working against efforts for truces or negotiations or peaceful settlement, because at the end of the day, they very much support fighting to the last Ukrainian, using Ukraine to weaken Russia. Joe Biden, of course, is going to be here on Thursday. There is a protest planned in Ottawa. I know some Haitian community organizations going to put out a statement about the push for Canada to join military intervention in Haiti that Biden's been pushing for a good 6 months now. Obviously, they're going to be pushing for more Canadian military spending, getting more aggressive on China. Probably going to talk about the proxy war, pushing more Canadian support for Ukraine. It's going to be interesting to see what the NDP does. If there is a sort of a stand. I think Biden's speaking to Parliament, so if there is a standing ovation, where the NDP MP is going to stand up and cheer for Joe Biden, unfortunately, that's a genuine possibility. Joe Biden, of course, is somebody who was a staunch supporter of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Headed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at the time, worked hard to promote George W. Bush's invasion, and today is the 20th anniversary of that invasion. There's a good story by Davide Mastrice on Passage titled "20 Years Ago, Canadian Media Lined Up to Call for War in Iraq," and there's also an article in Canadian Dimension titled "Debunking the Myth of Canada's Non-Involvement in the Iraq War." And so, this was a horrible, far, far clearer violation of international law, worse death and destruction than what Russia's doing in Ukraine. At the time, in 2002, I was a vice president of the Concordia Student Union, very dynamic activist campus at Concordia. I remember being here in Montreal, the big protests. There's mobilization going on for months and months before the invasion. I was not a central organizer here in Montreal, but fairly involved at the periphery, going to some of the Échec à la Guerre meetings and quite active in mobilizing on campus. We actually set up a group called Block the Empire to try to sort of target we organized a sit-in, a shutdown of the U.S. consulate in Montreal one morning, early in the morning, to just in the lead up to invasion. And then we would later organize tours of Canadian arms companies that were selling weapons to the Americans. But I remember the mobilization, right? This was huge mobilizations, huge, tons of activism that was going into it. Here in Quebec, I think the climate was different. We actually had corporate media that was challenging. Le Journal de Montréal challenge was, got by the end, was quite staunchly against the invasion. And in fact, all of the politicians were wearing like white symbols to, call for peace, including Jean Charest, the liberal leader at the time. And so there was it was quite a mobilization, and that's part of why Canada doesn't join the coalition of the willing, and so I thought I would invite Richard Sanders from the Coalition to Oppose the Arms Trade, who is who was involved in some of that activism at the time, but has also written, I think, probably the definitive kind of Canadian account of Canada's actual contribution to the Iraq War. And so, Richard, I know you're there, and I hope I've unmuted you. So, I guess just to begin with, can you, sort of set the stage of the, mobilizations in the months before the U.S. launched its invasion, and also just talk a little bit about how Canada actually supported the invasion?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Am I coming through? Okay, good. All right. Yeah, thanks. I think it's really important to point out that the war in Iraq really started in 1991, and 2003 was just a different phase in the war. It had several different stages or phases, and Canada was very openly involved in the war back in 1990-91 when George Bush Sr. launched that, and Canada even provided fighter aircraft to fly alongside to escort U.S. bombers to decimate Iraq. And in that war, in the first stages of that war, which I think was in part not only just to get oil, but also because the Soviet Union had just been knocked over. People say it collapsed, but I think you could equally accurately say that it was knocked over. They were trying for decades to destroy it, and they finally did. Anyway, one of the things that the Americans did, and we helped them to do, was to drop bombs on the water purification and sewage treatment plants and the electricity. And so what happened was they didn't have clean water. Besides all the other things that we bombed, one of the biggest things was that we just, we helped the Americans to do it, to destroy the water, their chance of having clean water. So hundreds of thousands of people over the next decade, because of the sanctions regime that was imposed on Iraq, hundreds of thousands of people died from the drinking, foul water. And that's a war crime right there. That is a massive war crime. In fact, during the right at the end of the 90s, around 2000 or something, UNESCO estimated that 500,000 children under the age of 5, Iraqi children, died as a result of the sanctions. So they had all this destruction wreaked upon them, and then they couldn't get clean water, and they didn't have electricity, and their hospitals and everything were decimated, and everything else. And so, and UNESCO didn't even say how many children over the age of 5 died as a result. So anyway, the war really started in 1990, then all throughout the next decade, right up until 2003, when Bush Jr. Launched the 2003 war that we're talking about today, that was 20 years ago. It was just a really long, horrendous war that killed, I'm sure, like maybe, I don't know, more than 1 million people. I've seen different estimates, but so the whole mythology that Canada wasn't involved, it's ludicrous. It's ridiculous. And I was actually naive enough to think at one point that if I amassed all these facts and all this data and all this information, just itemizing all of the ways that Canada was involved, I actually was naive enough, stupid enough to think that we could turn the myth back. Like if enough people knew this information, and it's so blatantly, so clear that Canada was involved, that they wouldn't be able to continue this myth. I hope, I don't know how long I had that delusion for, that I could help stop it, but we couldn't stop it. I think the myth is still very alive and strong. The Liberal Party spread the myth. They still have it as part of their talking points on how great they are because they stood up to the Americans. And the reason that they thought it was so important to pretend that Canada wasn't involved was because of the reasons that you're talking about. There was obviously massive opposition to the war, not only in Canada, but around the world. The general public were coming out in huge protests, against launching that war in 2003. So it was clear that the Liberals did not want to be associated with it, but at the same time, they wanted to do everything they possibly could to support the war, while at the same time pretending and duping people into thinking that they weren't involved, or that if they were involved, it was only in minor, insignificant ways. But there's a lot of ways that they were involved, and if I could, I'd like to go through some of the main ways that Canada was involved. But before doing that, I just want to mention that the U.S. ambassador to Canada at the time, Paul Cellucci, on March 25th, 2003, so that's 20th anniversary is coming up, he said that, quote, ironically, Canadian naval vessels, aircraft, and personnel will supply more support to this war in Iraq indirectly than most of the 46 countries that are fully supporting our efforts there. Now, by fully supporting, maybe he means that they were willing to have their name on that list that you mentioned of the coalition of the willing. So Canada didn't want to be publicly recognized as a member of the coalition of the willing, but it wanted to do everything it could to show its willingness to support the war, but it wanted to do it all secretly. And amazingly, they managed to do a lot of this stuff in secret. So Colin Powell, a week before Cellucci said that, so we're looking at right around 20 years ago today, where Colin Powell said, quote, we now have a coalition of the willing who have publicly said they could be included in such a listing. But he said there are 15 other nations who, for one reason or another, do not wish to be publicly named, but will be supporting the coalition. So Canada was the leading member of that other list, the secret list of countries that were that were willing to support the war, but were not willing to have their name listed on a list of countries supporting the war. And the media, there were, you can look at different articles that came out in the mainstream media and put together little bits and pieces and to get clues about how Canada was involved from some reporters' coverage of the war, and from what Canadian officials said, military, political officials said. But it's hard to find a place where you get all that information put together. And when you see a huge list of all the different things that Canada did, it's overwhelming. And I don't know how anybody could say that Canada, wasn't involved or chose not to be, or that we stood up to the Americans by saying that we wouldn't be involved. So anyway, so I want to mention some of the things. One of the main things I think that Canada did, but which is so often ignored by the public, or not ignored, but just is the public is unaware of, or that the peace movement, even leftists, don't maybe know about, or anyway, is the role of the Navy, which was mentioned by Cellucci. So at the onset of the war, so 20 years ago, when that shock and awe happened, a Canadian Rear Admiral, Roger Giroir, he was the commander of a fleet called the Task Force 151, which had 20 warships from 6 nations. And the Canadian frigate, the Iroquois, was the lead ship in that task force. And Giroir was in charge of the whole task force. And so Task Force 151 basically escorted U.S. Aircraft carriers and warships right up to through the Persian Gulf, right up to the coast of Iraq, and from there they launched the shock and awe bombardment of Iraq. That came from the sea, from ships that had warplanes on them. So Canada was leading the task force which brought those weapons systems, major weapon systems, warplanes, warships, right to the coast of Iraq. to launch the shock and awe bombardment of Iraq. And not, but besides that, other Canadian ships, warships, contributed vital fleet support functions that were crucial to sustaining the coalition naval operations, including fueling the ships and providing them with everything that they needed. Everything that these warships needed, they got from Canadian ships that are designed to do that. Another thing, and then, so that's just during the initial few months of the war when we were doing that. But for years afterwards, we had Canadian frigates and destroyers taking part in carrier strike groups that are U.S. Little groups of 5 or 6 warships centered around an aircraft carrier, and Canadian frigates were participating in those carrier strike groups and protecting them and doing all the things that they needed to do to help them get into place. So for at least 4 years afterwards. Another thing that we did was people say, oh, we didn't provide a lot of boots on the ground, but you know what we provided was generals who led hundreds of thousands of troops on the ground. We were almost too good to just have soldiers on the ground. We had generals that were leading huge masses of soldiers, not only American soldiers, but multinational forces from all the coalition of the willing. Canada was leading them. Canadian generals were leading them. For example, General Walt Natinzik. He was the deputy commanding general of the multinational corps, and he led 35,000 U.S. troops in Iraq throughout 2004. Then there's also Brigadier General Nicholas Matern, who was the former head of Canada's JTF-2 counterterrorism commandos, and he was the deputy commanding general of the U.S. Army's 18th Airborne Corps. And so he reported directly to the U.S. general who led 170,000 multinational troops from different countries. And then there was Major General Peter Devlin, who was the deputy commanding general of that same multinational corps from early January 27th till at least May of 2008. And these guys got medals for doing what they did. There's no hiding that the fact that we did this, but people don't even think about it or don't know about it. Most people, or many people. Okay, another thing we did before the launch of the war was that Canada supplied military planners who worked at the U.S. Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, and they were directly involved in planning the war against Iraq. So again, it's almost like we're not going to get our boots dirty by sending troops. We're going to help organize, plan, orchestrate. Canada was very involved in commanding and controlling and organizing the thing. We're right in there with the Americans in that sense. So after for 6 months or so in Tampa, these war planners were there, and then they were transferred to the Persian Gulf during the war, and they were in the command and control headquarters from which the Iraq war was orchestrated. Another thing that we did was we supplied military personnel aboard the AWACS planes. These are E-3 Sentry aircraft that help coordinate the air war, but they provide surveillance, command, control, and communication service to the different warplanes that are out there dropping bombs and doing all the things that warplanes do. They have these sort of like flight control centers. Like it's kind of like at an airport, you've got this building that up high, and it sort of coordinates all the flights. Well, they have that function is done by personnel on a plane that's flying around the war zone. So those are AWACS planes, and we supplied a lot of military personnel for years that were in those planes, and they were. We had a commanding officer at the Tinker Air Force Base where these guys are centered. the AWACS crews. Another thing we did was that when the US was sending troops and sending weapons and sending all the materiel to the war, they were landing in Canada, refueling here, changing their crews, and then flying off again. So for example, in March of 2003, the CEO of Gander Airport Authority said, quote, "We've been getting roughly 2 or 3 US flights a day with probably 1,000 troops coming through each day." Okay. We also supplied Canadian CC-130 military transport planes, which supplied coalition forces during the Iraq War. And Canadian pilots were flying British and American warplanes during the war, because, different countries that are allies, they send their forces, their pilots and whatnot, to work with the other forces. It's kind of exchange program. It's like a student exchange, except it's a warfighter exchange program. And so we actually had our pilots flying American planes, flying British planes. Okay, so another thing we did was we freed up US troops so that they could go to Iraq by taking over their work in Afghanistan. So Brian Tobin, who was the industry minister, he said, quote, "The US needs to free up key logistical and military assets on the ground in Afghanistan for the upcoming campaign in Iraq. Canada can and should offer to fill the gap." And a week later, the defense minister, John McCallum, announced a major troop deployment to Afghanistan. And so by August of 2003, there were 1,800 Canadian soldiers in Kabul, relieving the US soldiers so they could go to Iraq. So in effect, we're just moving pieces around on a chessboard, and that freed up 1,800 US troops to go to. We did supply some ground troops, but that's usually the thing that people point at and say Canada wasn't involved, because we didn't have very many ground troops. Okay, generally, a few little things I should mention. We facilitated US weapons testing for many years before that. And so there were 2 types of cruise missiles and the Global Hawk surveillance drone that were used. All of these were used extensively in Iraq, and these were tested over Canada. I say Canadian airspace, but a lot of that is unceded territory that really is First Nations territory. But anyway, so these are kinds of weapons that were used in Iraq that were tested over Canada. Depleted uranium. Canada is the top exporter of uranium. Depleted uranium is a waste product left over, and it's used in weapons, DU munitions that the US has used in Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, and in Iraq. And also US missiles, bombs, and warplanes used in Iraq contain the ballast. They contain depleted uranium ballast, because it's incredibly heavy stuff. Another thing, the radar sat. There were 2 Canadian satellites that are used partly for civilian purposes, but also for military purposes. And the US was given the right and the privilege of downloading data from our radar satellites for weapons targeting in Iraq. And of course, having control of the high point, like a satellite, gives you a really good foot up, if that's the right expression. Gives you an advantage and an ability to target accurately, so that your weapons are not just being wasted, but they're hitting the targets that you want them to hit, which are not just civilian military targets, but are civilian targets too. Another thing is diplomatic cheerleading. So Chrétien said that the US, quote, "had the right to invade Iraq," unquote, and he urged Canadians. He said that he, quote, "urged Canadians not to criticize the US for attacking Iraq, because this could be construed as supporting Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein," unquote. And then after the invasion, Canada was training the Iraqi police, and at the International Training Center, Police Training Center in Jordan, and helped to train 32,000 Iraqi police officers. who were being deployed to replace the US soldiers. And then we were also training Iraqi troops. We provided millions of dollars to NATO training, the NATO training mission in Iraq. And that's another thing that Canada likes to do, is to train people. We did that in Haiti as well. And, so when we had a Canadian colonel who was deployed to Baghdad as a special advisor to the deputy commanding general of the NATO training mission in Iraq. Here's another thing, is that in May 2003, Canada provided senior police officers and financial support to Iraq's Ministry of the Interior, and they had death squads that were, quote, responsible for abduction, torture, and murder. In 2006, the UN's human rights chief in Iraq reported that, quote, hundreds of Iraqis are being tortured to death or summarily executed every month in Baghdad alone by death squads working for the Ministry of the Interior, and Canada supplied money to that, and provided senior police officers and financial support to the Ministry of the Interior. And I mean, it goes without saying that Canada supplied military equipment, military exports. At least 100 Canadian military industries that I found were supplying equipment for the Iraq War, everything that you can think of. I'll give you a few little examples here. SNC sold millions of bullets for US forces occupying Iraq. General Dynamics Canada sold hundreds of Stryker armored vehicles. Those are those things that we sell to Saudi Arabia. And those vehicles in Iraq, they logged literally millions of miles in Iraq. And Bristol Aerospace in Winnipeg was selling cluster bomb dispensing CRV rockets that were fired from US aircraft in Iraq. And finally, I'll just mention that the Canada Pension Plan investments include hundreds of war-related industries, including most of the world's top 20 weapons producers, and that the CPP investments include leading prime contractors for virtually every major US weapons system. And of course, they were all used in Iraq. So Canada had, these are only some of the key ways that Canada was involved. Other examples of Canadian involvement could be mentioned, but I think that gives you a pretty good idea that Canada was pretty darn involved, and anybody who says otherwise is either totally ignorant or they're lying. And they can't be, a lot of people can't be blamed for being ignorant of all this, because the media never covered it. They were so busy promoting the war that they didn't bother to really do much of a job on exposing how deeply involved Canada was. And so I think still a lot of people don't have a clue and think that Canada have fallen for this mythology that Canada, not only in general, is this great peace-loving country in the world, etc., which is one of the biggest obstacles that we have in the anti-war movement, but also that this sub myth that Canada wasn't involved in the Iraq War.
Thanks for that, Richard. There's a very good, I don't know if it's just one or if it's two reports that you did in terms of detailing all this out. So if somebody has a link to that, if they can post that in the chat.
Oh yeah. If you go to, I've got, yeah, that's the front cover of the issue that I did, Operation Silent Partner, Canada's Quiet Complicity in the Iraq War. And it's like, I don't know, 50 pages long or something, 54 pages long. And it goes into all sorts of details, of which I've only just given you the cold notes.
So now, I think there's a number of ways to look at this. I want to go into a slightly bigger terrain on this. I think I have said how I formulate it in some instances is that the Chrétien didn't give the Bush administration what it wanted above all else, which was official endorsement of the coalition of willing, but then provided innumerable forms of support. That's one formulation, and you can comment on that in if you agree with that or not. But the other element to all this that I think is that we need to consider, think about, that has bigger, ramifications, is that the Canadian military and the Canadian military industrial complex, Canadian foreign policy, is so intertwined with the U.S. military that the U.S. can't really go to war without Canada providing some form of support. That's tied into NORAD, that's tied into so many different agreements. And so in the here and now, with the institutional structures we currently have, be that the military, the arms industry, be that Canadian capitalism, the corporate class, be that Five Eyes Alliance, NORAD, et cetera, that the best an anti-war movement can get, in the case of 2003, those were the biggest anti-war demonstrations in the history of Canada. That the best you can get is the sort of like partial victory of the not officially joining the coalition of the willing, and then the government goes quietly goes to provide all kinds of different forms of support. So I think that is one of the ways to sort of like look at all of this in a kind of a more big picture level, and it informs how we look at Canadian foreign policy going forward. So I want you to comment on that, but also comment on your I know you've been very critical of the anti-war groups that sort of just jumped to, we won victory, we had victory, and they became kind of complicit in the government's effort to claim that they didn't join the war, especially as the war turned sour, and so you have these anti-war groups who go from sort of like opposing the government joining the U.S. led war to basically becoming almost, this may be going too far, but almost kind of like becoming like the propaganda arm of the government in sort of saying, they did the right thing, they were the moral thing, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I just thought that'd be, comment on all of that.
Yeah, the very good points that you're raising there, and to unpack a lot of that, it would take quite a bit of time, and we could really, this is something that needs to be discussed by the anti-war movement more, not only about the Iraq War, but about so many other things that often government-funded groups. This so well about Haiti, how these CETA-funded groups, development groups, peace groups, so-called democracy promotion groups, human rights groups, all basically helped to overthrow and set up the conditions to overthrow Aristide, and then cheerleaded the invasion, and then covered up the atrocities and the dictatorship that was imposed on Haiti after. And that happened right around the same time as Iraq. So as this 2003 stage in the Iraq War. But you've said that we didn't give the Canadian government didn't give the US what they wanted the most. And I'm not sure if we really know what the US government wanted the most. All those things that I mentioned are pretty important things that they need, that help them. And so I think that those things that they did want that help. They would have been really mad at us and probably would have overthrown our government one way or another if we had, in some crazy way we had been able to elect a government that would do such a thing, refuse to have any real participation in the Iraq War or any other war that the US is involved with, because Canada is always involved, like you say, and we're so integrated into it. But it's not just that our militaries are so deeply integrated. No two militaries in the world, I don't think, are as integrated as Canada is into the US. Like our ships and everything operate together like they're as if they're part of one team, which they are, or our armed force. Anyway, so I don't know. It would have been nice for the Americans if we had given them more support, but I think they were very happy. I mean, you look at what the US ambassador said, you know, hey, Canada is really supplying more than the other 48 countries. And we certainly were. I think that of all the countries in the world, you know, Britain and Australia were very, really helpful to the war, to the Americans. But I don't think there are very many other countries in the world that did more for the Iraq War than Canada did, because we did so many different things and so many big things to help, that if we missed out on this or a couple of things, we can't do everything, but we pretty much did everything that we possibly could, that without making it so obvious that the media could reasonably deny that we were involved. So the yeah, I don't know if that answers all the points that you raised, but one thing about the peace groups that support the war is that one of the many reasons why peace groups or anti-war groups would support Canada's involvement in a war, or would be part of the mythology to help cover up Canada's involvement, or would be part of the team to work with the government in creating a narrative and spreading a narrative that helps to promulgate a war. One of the things is that, and I think it might be ignored sometimes, you kind of touched on it, and that is claiming a victory. So you have, for example, Project Plowshares, which does a lot of really good work, but at the same time, it helped to promote the mythology that Canada wasn't involved. And I think one of the main reasons that it did that, I mean, because you look at it, I don't know if this is still on their list of accomplishments, but they had a web page that listed their accomplishments so that their supporters would give money to them, et cetera, and support them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they said that for 2003, I think it was the main item for 2003, I'm paraphrasing, but they said, we helped get the Canadian government to not be involved in the Iraq War. They take that on as a victory. So then people say, wow, that's a great group. It helped. It really played a major, because Plowshare said, because we have such good working relationship with the government, because for many years, they have received lots of funding from the government, and it's an arm of the churches. They're not the most radical force in the world, and they were involved in genocide for century or so. So, what do we expect? But anyway, it's done. The group Plowshares does a lot of great work, really good, but it will only go so far. And one of the things it needs to do, and like so many groups need to do, is raise money and get support from the public. And so they need to have victories that they can point to and put on a list. And if the general prevailing mythology is that Canada wasn't involved in the Iraq War, then they can cash in on that mythology by saying, we helped to keep Canada out of the war, so that Canada said no to the war, which we didn't say no to the war. So anyway. So
yeah, well, there's the famous quote from Amilcar Cabral: "Tell no lies, claim no easy victories." And it of course, it's for those who want to not be too offside with power. It's preferable to claim victories that that may not be there, and certainly not there in a complete sense. So we are basically at an hour, but I thought we'd open it up for a couple questions. But let's try to be kind of brief. Go ahead, Yuri.
Thank you, Eve. Hey, Richard. It's great to be on with two of the finest Canadian truth-telling historians and geocritics and media critics. Anywho, thanks for that, Richard. And I think my question is sort of given that there was so much protests in Canada against the Iraq War. What does that say, though, about a Canadian journalist that either works for the CBC or one of the major publications in which officially Canada is not joining the Iraq war, but then is doing all this stuff behind the scenes, which is them, being a part of this criminal war. And yet not one journalist wants to expose all of that and create quite a ruckus, and not one supposedly peace organization wants to champion all of this and lobby the NCP, or lobby whatever a Quebec nationalist party that's at least on paper claims that they were against the Iraq war. I just find that so shocking that that not one major journalist or even peace organization apart from yours would want to expose this, given this is such a huge scandal.
Yeah. It's not as bad as what you're saying. There were reporters that did expose Canadian complicity in the war, but they would expose one thing. There'd be an article somewhere in a mainstream media venue that would expose some Canadian role in the war, and would do a good job exposing that one thing. The problem was having one little thing exposed here and one little thing exposed there. Even in the mainstream media, you can still have the general myth that Canada wasn't involved, because, well, it's just, that guy's a report. Yeah, sure, we did X, but that's just a sort of like a, that's just one thing that we did. But generally we didn't. And so the myth can still live on. And in terms of other peace groups, there were lots of peace activists that were standing up against against Canada's participation in the war. I mean, there were other groups, but many of the mainstream anti-war groups and human rights groups, et cetera, especially the ones, but not necessarily the ones that are funded by the government, were not doing a good job exposing it. In fact, were in many cases helping to cover up Canadian involvement.
And actually, very quickly, which did most of the major Canadian newspapers and whatnot, like Globe and Mail, and all of those outlets, did they all support the Iraq war, despite the huge protests?
Well, I actually had an article in the Globe and Mail exposing Canada's involvement in the Iraq war in 2003. I think it was my only article ever in the Globe and Mail. It was an op-ed piece, and it went through a bunch of examples like what I did today, exposing it. So, I mean, they do occasionally, the information comes out, and I actually had an article in the Globe and Mail on this, but one article just goes, and then it disappears, and then no one ever remembers it or thinks about it, and it's just sort of an aberration. It's just sort of like, well, it's easy to miss that one article. It's just on page whatever, and if they are constantly hitting you with the myth, then you can throw in evidence to debunk the myth, but it can disappear in people's minds very easily because you're not being hit with it constantly 24/7. But it was a great victory for the peace movement that the government, that we showed so much opposition to that war that the government had to pretend that it wasn't involved. Whereas look at look at Ukraine now. There's no huge opposition to the war, and so they can just go and supply weapons to Ukraine, et cetera, and they don't have to cover it up. It's just like totally open about that.
I should say, I said that before, in David Mastrice's 20 years ago, Canadian media lined up to call for war in Iraq. He shows how basically all of the main media backed the war, pretty hard line. They allowed here and there they allowed some dissenting voices in there, but it was particularly English media was an overwhelming chorus of support. Go ahead, Joan.
Okay.
No, you just unmuted yourself. You just muted yourself.
There.
Go ahead.
Okay. So that was fantastic, Richard. I was very much involved with trying to stop the invasion, and at the United Nations. And I'd like to let you know what Canada was doing there, which was terrible. That at one point, the very important Security Council resolution was passed in 2002, and it was unanimous. And even Russia and Syria agreed to it. And in it, it said that if Iraq does not comply with getting rid of their weapons, then there would be serious consequences. Well, I remember going to the Canadian Embassy, where they were with the Voice of Women, and they circulated a paper that said that they supported the U.S. in claiming that there would be serious consequences, gave legitimacy to the invasion. And I remember going to a conference given by Sergei Lavrov, and I talked to him after the conference. I did ask him a question, but the point I wanted to make, I talked to him after the conference, and I said, did you agree with the U.S. that serious consequences justified the invasion? He said, no way. No, that Bush had sworn that he would never use the serious consequences, and for that reason, Russia did not oh God, I can't veto. It did not. God, I can't remember. I did not veto the invasion of Iraq, and so what I also saw at the UN is that at one point there was a resolution that the Great Britain would not agree to. So what Canada was doing was going around all over, working on a revised proposal, so that because you remember Cretin said he would only go in if the UN Security Council supported it. So this was Canada's big mission behind the scenes. It was to persuade the countries to support an invasion that would become that the UK would be comfortable with. So they worked on it for 3 weeks. It was all behind the scenes, and Canada was agreeing all the time that this clause, this important clause in the 2002 one, that there would be serious consequences. I mean, the serious consequence could have been going to the International Court of Justice, for example, but no, that was what they were really pushing for. And I can remember, in reference to the media, when I was there, I went up, and I was not a member of the media, but I snuck up the back stairs and went to the meeting of the media. This was just before the invasion, where the Security Council was working on it. And I asked one of the reporters, are you going to expose the fact that the U.S. is coercing and bribing all the members of the Security Council to support it? In fact, when I went up the elevator, they said that the U.S. was leaning on one of the countries that was the chair of the Security Council. So they said, well, there's no evidence. So when the Pakistani representative came out, I said, could you please inform the media about what sort of evidence there is that there's been coercion by the U.S. to support the, and of course he didn't respond. But I was hoping that the media would pick up on it. All the international media was there. This was a big thing. So then, and they didn't. But the only person that responded was the handler that said, do you have a media pass? And I said, no. So when I went to a conference after on the media. I asked why the media at the U.S. was so reluctant to challenge, and the media didn't say anything there. So I absolutely agree with you. They just don't. It's just terrible. And this was the whole media. No matter what you say, they just won't do anything about it because they're afraid they'll lose their status. Because I tried to. I intervened at. I love your intervention, by the way. I love all your interventions, and that was wonderful with the sports minister. In the invasion of Iraq, I got a media pass to go and challenge Jamie Shea, who was the spokesperson for NATO. So I went there and I was right in front of him. I grabbed the microphone, but he ignored me. When it came back again, I grabbed it and said and reported that at that time, the Canada, along with all NATO, would not respect the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. And then I was told after the media said to me, well, you're blackballed, you'll never get in again. We're afraid to do anything because we won't be able to get in, we won't be able to go there. But this was in front of the whole media. But what we did at the UN, and I'll just try to finish quickly, this was the main campaign at the UN among peace groups. And these were not funded peace groups, these were individuals, that most of them. And we started the United for Peace Coalition. I don't know if you heard about that, but what we were doing was to try to get an emergency. We were using the Uniting for Peace resolution, which was a very important document that if the permanent members of the Security Council cannot agree, then the decision can go to the UN General Assembly. So this is what we were trying to do, to get an emergency vote in the UN General Assembly to oppose the war. And we almost succeeded until the US sent an intimidating letter around to all the members of all the state members. And so then it didn't go anywhere. So that was, that's what we were trying to do at the international level. And I'll just stop there. But it was so disappointing, and that didn't go through, because I think if there had been a UN general resolution at that time condemning the war, I think that could have made a difference. But it was just and we also had, with the Voice of Women, we had something, Women Say No to War, in 27 different languages, and tried to get the media there. And there was the German media came, but then we went into the UN. This was across from the UN, and I saw someone from CNN, and I said, why didn't you come to the rally? And he said, well, I know there was not going to be any violence. So they were completely ignored. So we tried, but I absolutely agree with you that people are not willing to take a strong stand in many cases, the NGOs, especially if they're funded. They don't want to risk their funding. And I've always been against that for years. So sorry to take so long. Bye for now, thanks.
Unless you have a comment, Richard, go ahead, Hans.
Well, thank you, Richard. I have been a fan of yours for a long time. In your opening remarks, you referred to the first Gulf War, Desert Storm, in 1991. Is it fair to characterize that war as the first hegemonic war at the end of the Cold War, which even had the support of Gorbachev initially, and that's why it passed the UN. Canada was involved at that tail end of that war in hiding the guy that was called the Q jumper in Parliament, caused quite a stir, al-Mashat. He was the ambassador of Baghdad to Washington, and his counterpart, April Gillespie, was involved in hoodwinking Saddam, that Washington was indifferent to his invasion of Kuwait, who had been stealing oil by angular drilling into Iraqi oil fields. Could you enlarge on that briefly, lest we entirely forget
Yeah,
the first Desert Storm, the first Iraqi war?
right, right. Yeah, that was a good point. Yeah, so April Gillespie, she was the U.S.
Canadian
ambassador
born.
to, oh, Canadian born, but a U.S. ambassador to Iraq. Is that what
That's
she
correct.
was? And she was in a conversation with Saddam Hussein, and she told him something to the effect that, like you said, that the United States is indifferent to your uh, invasion or your relations with Kuwait. Like basically, Iraq was given the go-ahead, the green light to invade Kuwait. But then that was one of the main pretexts that was used to launch the war against Iraq. And so basically, the Americans set them up. They told them that they didn't mind if they invaded Kuwait, and then when they did, boy, they sure found out pretty fast. So they obviously wanted the war with Iraq, and they always have very elaborate and deceptive means of getting their way when they want a war. And they aren't telling the truth about why they want the war, because the general public does not want to be told or know or hear about the fact, the reality that the U.S. wages all these wars, killing millions and tens of millions of people around the world because they want more money, and the corporations that they are shills for want to make extra trillions of dollars or whatever by exploiting people or stealing their natural resources or having access to slave labor in factories or whatever it is, or overthrowing governments and keeping them in power by force. You don't tell the public, oh, we're doing this so that we can make trillions of dollars, because the public isn't going to support you in your war. So they have to make up other excuses for war. They have to have pretexts, and they sometimes provoke them. Sometimes they just make them up, like the Gulf of Tonkin. They say, oh, we were shot at by this Vietnamese ship. Well, you never were. It's just a big lie that you made up. Or sometimes they'll provoke the other side to attack them, and then they can say, oh, they hit us first, so we have to hit back, or whatever. They'll make up all sorts of lies. So I think that's what you're getting at. That's important. And the weapons of mass destruction, look at that in 2003. That was a big lie that they told, and they did it at the UN. And Colin Powell's there holding up this little vial of whatever stuff that's all just fabricated as an excuse for the war, and to get the public and to get the different countries around the world on side. They'll pull out all the stops to lie and deceive people when trillions, I mean, you think about it, I mean, people lie in order to steal $50 or $100 or $1,000 or something. If there's trillions of dollars at stake, can imagine the lies. Everybody already knows this. Sorry, I'm going on about something that's so obvious, but yeah. So sorry, I shouldn't have.
Go ahead,
talked so
Greg.
long.
Richard, back in the 1990s, you may recall that the Canadian media did an incredibly good job of exposing the Canadian Airborne Regiment's torture and murder of a Somali youth. And to the credit of the Canadian media, they published a photograph of the young Somali boy, being held up by a Canadian airborne soldier, bloodied and battered. And this was exposed by I believe a Canadian Forces medical doctor who blew the whistle on this. And I'm just wondering, was it just because of this was such an egregious atrocity that the media took it so seriously? And why are we not getting more information about Canadian atrocities, rapes in Haiti? The Canadian Forces are notorious for rapes that were perpetrated in Afghanistan. Why is this not being exposed? These are thugs. The Canadian Airborne Regiment was disbanded, thankfully, because of that exposure. And we need more of that kind of reporting. So just if you could comment on that quickly, please.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly why sometimes the truth break through the giant wall of the media and come through a crack, and like why sometimes reporters can report on things and tell the truth, and then other times they can't, and there's a massive cover-ups. I guess it's very complicated to know exactly all the reasons for that. I'm not sure why it happened, why it was allowed to happen, or why it was able to happen with Somalia. Sometimes you have to be so skeptical, so cynical about the media coverage of atrocities, don't you? Because they'll sometimes those atrocities didn't even happen, and then other times they'll cover up atrocities, and then other times there'll be an atrocity and they'll cover it, so a real atrocity. But so it's very complicated, and there's no one explanation for why, I guess, for why sometimes we can hear the truth and other times we just hear lies constantly. I wish I could give you a good simple answer to that, but I don't know. I haven't figured it out myself yet. There's just so many different factors involved why these things happen or don't happen.
Propaganda system is both intense and subtle at the same time, I think.
Well, and another thing was that you mentioned that the airborne division was disbanded. Well, remember the RCMP used to do all this undercover work, and then there was such a scandal about the RCMP doing things. I think it was because of the FLQ, was it not? Where they were blowing up mailboxes, like you had RCMP members who were pretending to be FLQ, and they would blow things up, burn down a barn, go and steal documents, and blow up bombs in mailboxes in Montreal or Quebec City, I'm not sure. And then when it was exposed, that they had to create CSIS. Now, are we any better off with CSIS than we were with the RCMP? The RCMP had been doing it for 100 years, but eventually they had to close down their operations. But then they just created another outfit to do it, and maybe they got a better, more sophisticated espionage agency than the RCMP could ever supply. So maybe they wanted the RCMP to be exposed so that, maybe some people wanted them to be exposed so that they could create a CSIS. I don't know. It's so complicated. You never know what's going on when you're talking about espionage agencies, top secret organizations, military intelligence. You never really know for sure what's happening. It could be the opposite of what we're told. Sometimes you think it might be a really great thing that's happened. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a terrible thing, or maybe some terrible thing happened and it actually is a good thing, because everything is topsy-turvy sometimes. It's really hard to know what's going on, especially when you're dealing with top secret military intelligence organizations and what their plans are and how they're manipulating people with propaganda and pretext incidents and false flags and all those sort of things. It's really hard to know. I'm just saying, man, we got our work cut out for us, because it's really hard to figure out, and it's very complicated, and you never know for sure sometimes what's really going on.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, guys, I'm supposing your two parties in Canada, between the Conservatives and Liberals, there's really no difference with them when it comes to war and peace. Just like our two parties down here between the Democrats and the Republicans. In some ways, I think the Democrats are worse today. They're really a party. There's absolutely no dissent what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, and the Democrats are just like supporting the war machine. Totally. I mean, there's just no dissent, and the only dissent we have is between independent left journalists, because all our mainstream media over here is not question anything. They don't go back to they just assume that Russia went in when 2021, but they don't they don't talk about anything leading up to what happened at that point. So that's where we stand in this country. There's just absolutely no dissent, and it looks like we're going to still keep feeding the military to Zelensky in Ukraine.
I think it's similar to what we've got in Canada with the difference, the so-called difference between the Liberals and Conservatives. In so many ways, they are virtually identical, and they have to kind of create these wedge issues to distinguish themselves from each other. But when it comes to big money issues and when it comes to war, they're not that much different. The Liberals and Conservatives or the Democrats and Republicans. They're basically, they create the illusion that there's a big difference between the two. And on some very narrow issues that don't relate to war and huge, vast amounts of money, they are different. Like, for example, on, I don't know, homosexuality or something, like if you're really socially conservative, then you're gonna use that wedge issue to make the Democrats look like they're too, you make it look as if there's a huge difference between the Republicans and Democrats by creating those wedge issues that you can get people to focus on that. And then if they focus on those things, they ignore they don't see that really in so many ways, like you're saying, and I agree with you, that those two major parties are pretty much the same. And in Canada, the NDP is getting more and more and more aligned, and it's trying to become almost like another Liberal party. It's trying to supplant the Liberal Party because it wants power so much that it's willing to compromise, and it has identical. All three of our parties, including the NDP, want to increase military spending. They all are competing with themselves about Ukraine and who's going to be more supportive of Ukraine, or who's going to be more Russophobic, or who's going to be more anti-communist, or who's going to be more, like they're so similar. The differences between them seem to be in many ways getting less significant, and but they want to create the impression or the illusion that they're so different from the other. But like, I think what you're saying is what I agree with. I've been saying that sort of thing, and so many other people have been saying that for so many years, that there really isn't that much difference on big issues like war and money.
Richard underplayed the number. It's not just the three parties. I would say it's all five parties.
Okay. Okay.
So you guys only in the US don't have two-party system. We have the five-party system, but they all agree on more weapons, more NATO expansion.
All right.
But that is the reality of 2023, particularly with regards to Ukraine, but I think more generally with regards to questions of war and peace. But I thank you, Richard, for this illuminating talk, and thanks everyone for coming out. Same place, same time next week. Have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.